Welcome to the Conflict Stories podcast with Sam and Scott, where real people share their professional and personal stories of conflict.
Whether you're looking for advice or the comfort of knowing you're not alone, Conflict Stories brings the human and positive side of conflict to the forefront.
Tune in, connect, learn, and transform. Welcome to Conflict Stories. I'm Sam Hardy and I'm coming to you from Ghana and Paramount country in the Adelaide Hills, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present.
And I'm Scott, coming from Bundjalung country in Byron Bay, and today we are joined by Laura May, who is joining us from Barcelona in Spain.
Hi Laura.
As I like to call it, the Bestalona.
Bestalona, I love it. I first got to know Laura when she was the executive director of the International Mediation Institute based in The Hague, a long way from her roots back in Tasmania, that little island on the south of Australia, if you're not in Australia and know where it is. Laura is now truly a global citizen, having lived and worked in Australia, the UK, Russia, Belgium, and now Spain. She has professional skills in leadership, conflict resolution, project management, corporate strategy and governance, IT, community engagement, and she's clearly overwhelmingly modest, despite her business name being the Awesome Consultant, which she tells me she named in her period of peak awesomeness. Laura calls herself an intrapreneur, which is kind of like an entrepreneur, but they focus on innovative new solutions within existing organisations. She's also a mediation fangirl, and she hosts her own podcast called the Conflict Tipping Podcast for mediate.com, which focuses on innovative strategies for responding to social conflict. She speaks to guests with expertise in all facets of conflict, from organisational behaviour, emotions, technology, media, public and private social responsibility, and political polarisation. No shortage of guests, I'm sure, at the moment. And Laura's also a keen tango dancer, which can sometimes lead to the need for conflict resolution when she gets too enthusiastic with her tango kicks. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Sam. I've never heard myself described with so many commas before.
It was one of the most fun introductions.
It's a good one, and Sam got through it well. Occasionally we have issues with word pronunciations.
Yeah, there are a few words that I just cannot pronunciate. See, there's one. Oh, we're off to a great start.
What a interesting life you've led, Laura. We generally start at the beginning if we can, and as comfortable as you are, to talk about your childhood in terms of conflict and what that was like and how you grew up, and just to get a little bit of a sense of what that was like for you.
This, I would say, is a bit of a tricky one. Yeah, I would say characterized by a lot of conflict.
Yes.
And yet I was not the mediator or perhaps have any conflict resolution skills that I would have today, which has obviously been part of my journey. And yeah, it's a complex one. And so I guess for that reason, I don't really talk about my family of origin so much, but one thing that I like to constantly tell people about today, I've told this story already twice today, I can't control myself, is actually what mediation training specifically helped me change within myself. Because certainly in my early 20s, in the workplace before that, like every single school report would be like, Laura needs to learn tact. And it kind of obviously escalated when I reached the workplace. And so I was very fortunate to have some managers earlier in my career that helped me sort of redress this more sharkish, more pro-conflict, but strong kind of way behavior that I had in those years. But it was only when I did my master's and I did a course on peace negotiation and mediation. It was only when I did that course that I learned the tools. And so everything just finally clicked for me. And I was like, oh, the universe suddenly makes sense now. And so for me, actually doing that, you can hear the mediation fangirl that Sam was talking about. Mm-hmm. But it was through doing that training that I changed not just myself and my approach to conflict, but honestly, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say the course of my life, because everything I've done since has been related to conflict or bringing people together or emotional intelligence, whether it's leaders in the workplace or whether it's hanging out at games night with friends. That was just a profound change for me.
What were the main things that you got from it that changed for you?
I described myself as sharkish earlier, and I'm making a reference to the sort of the Thomas Kilmann test, right? Where it's about your own goals, other people's goals, and do you go more for your own or others? And I remember the first time I ever did that test was high school psychology or something along those lines. And I was the shark, and that's where that comes from. And just for those who are listening but are not aware, you'd be a shark, you'd be a teddy bear, you'd be a turtle who hides away from it all, you'll be a fox who kind of compromises in the middle, or you'll be this owl, symbol of wisdom. The important thing about this, and the thing that distinguishes the owl, is this space for exploration where people have that authentic exchange and dialogue, obviously about their interests and their needs, and they are able to therefore generate new solutions, which could be bigger, better, more appropriate, more innovative, whatever it was for all parties involved. And that was what made the click. I was like, actually, by being a shark, yes, I might get my own goals. I'm probably going to burn some bridges in the way, but I could actually do so much better if I was able to get to the owl space. And then learning about the structures of mediation and how it works, I was like, all right, so I have the willingness, I have the objective, and now I also have the toolkit. So that is why I'm so big on mediation, because it was so transformative for me.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'm interested to know how often you deal with conflict situations where you're moving people from a shark, teddy, or turtle towards the owl space. And particularly your experience in so many different countries and cultures. What have you noticed in terms of those conflict characters, in terms of where people are more situated? And what do you do to bring them into that owl space?
Firstly, I would say that I rarely meet people who would be comfortable even describing themselves as sharks, because sharks do have a bad rep, and I get it, right? You don't want to be the one trampling over others or going for the throat. They'll clamber over you to get to the top. But I do meet an incredibly large number of people who would put themselves into the teddy space, the people-pleasing space, where they sacrifice their own goals, but the other person gets their goals. Turtles as well, so the avoidance space. This is what I encounter more than anything. And Scott, you mentioned this idea of sort of internationalism or cultures, and I wonder if there's tendencies in there. Certainly, there can be a gender dynamic to where you would fit on this, right? Because it's more acceptable perhaps to be a shark if you're a finance bro than it is if you are a woman in whatever capacity. And there's also that social pressure, of course, to be polite and to be good and to give things up and whatever it is in favor of the greater good or your family or whatever. And I do wonder if there's other types of cultural elements or what have you that could come into that. But actually, to get back to your question, you asked about how to help people move from one space to the other. The first step, coaching, realize where you are. You've got the goal, all right? So what is the reality? It's like, okay, well, right now I'm a teddy bear or a shark. And obviously looking at the potential options for getting there, right? Which in this case is often it's equipping with those tools. It's not just mediation tools. There's other stuff that comes in there as well. If I think about the more people-pleasing teddy bears, then we'll do work on boundaries, for instance. And also those messages like, why do I sacrifice myself for the sake of others? So there's a lot of stuff that can be unpacked there. I talk a lot about BATNers with people pleasers as well.
Do you want to explain what a BATNer is? Because not everyone might know.
Absolutely. So it's a best alternative to a negotiated solution or a backup plan. So if your negotiation doesn't work for whatever reason, negotiation can also be in the informal sense. You know, you're talking to your flatmate about who does the dishes, anything like this. What is your backup plan if you don't reach an agreement? Or what is your best backup plan? So that's what a BATNer is, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement.
It's good, actually. I did a 2-day training yesterday on mediation conflict resolution, and a lot of the attendees were youth workers. And I introduced that term BATNer because sometimes you get a young person and a parent who are in conflict, and the young person's comes and they're not that keen on it. And one of the things obviously you have to look at is, well, what's going to happen if you don't sort this out with your mum or dad or carer or whoever it might be? And I guess you don't say, well, do you know what your BATNer is? But you do explore the potential consequences, which can be the motivating factor to actually go ahead with it, even though they're not that keen. And it's an interesting one, isn't it?
People often forget about the alternatives. They get caught up on the thing they want and they fight sometimes pointlessly for that thing, and they forget that that might not be possible, that there might be other options in the room, as you said, some other better outcomes, but also they forget that there are things they could do outside of the room or outside of the negotiation. And people get really fixated, don't they, on that one thing.
We definitely get locked into our positions. This example you just gave, actually, of youth workers mediating between parents or carers and children, I think is a particularly interesting one, because there's obviously a power dynamic there, and it's different to other contexts. I mean, the workplace managers, employees, sure, but in that case, they're all adults, right? And they might have a better idea of what their partners or their backup plans can be. Whereas if you're talking about children in difficult situations, they might not know about youth support or what resources could be there or what actually their full suite of options are. And of course, as a mediator, are you being interventionist if you tell them about that? So I'd be very curious, when you were working with these youth workers, was there sort of discussion of other supports or how to overcome this particular type of quandary? One of my favorite words.
Quandary. That's a good word. Yeah, I actually did 9 years with parent-adolescent conflict, so I dealt a lot with teenagers, and you're right, sometimes they're not aware of the other alternatives, and I probably only go there when they're saying, "No, I definitely don't wanna do this mediation," and of course, there's always exceptions to the mediation if there's violence or protective issues. One of the workers yesterday talked about the young person getting off ice and then coming home to the parent who then offers them ice, which just sounds pretty crazy. But that's her reality. She's working in that more protective space. And so we talked about that concept of, well, we're neutral when it comes to being impartial as a mediator, but we're not neutral when it comes to safety issues. So that sort of comes into it. But if that's not an issue, if safety isn't a component, then it's more about how much willingness, I think you used the word ripeness, it's an interesting one. How much willingness is there for both parties to participate? I guess we try not to have an agenda as a mediator, do we? But we also have some hope that these parties can find a way forward. So I think we're trying to push that, I think, more than go, well, do you know that you can go and live at a youth refuge? It's about how much do we encourage without forcing, but then if it becomes obvious that this young person is not interested in the mediation and understanding those reasons, then I would probably explore the other options. That's how I would think about it. Yeah.
It's super challenging, isn't it, philosophically, because we have this mediators are not meant to give advice, but in some situations you can provide information, and family mediation is one of those areas where under legislation you're almost required to provide information. And then it overlaps into that idea of informed consent. Can people agree to something if they don't have all the information about their backup plans, what is available to them, like a youth refuge or support services? So it's a really tricky space, and I think it illustrates one of the things about this field, that we talk about things in a very black and white fashion. We're impartial, we don't give advice, but there are situations where that's not the right thing to do. What do you think, Laura?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you, Sam, about the flexibility of the process. And I guess I would also wonder, Scott gave the example of if there's safety issues, then of course there'll be additional support. But I guess I'm thinking about, like, when we're a mediator, can we decide what is safe for somebody? Because it obviously goes beyond physical stuff to emotional safety and what have you as well. We can't decide for somebody what their idea of safety is, and therefore we decide when to give them the tools. So it's a really, really interesting one.
Laura, we catch up every now and then and talk about some challenging matters that each of us deal with. And I know you've had some really interesting ones where values have come into it. And I wondered if you might want to share, obviously in a de-identified way, some of the challenges when you're working with strong value-laden conflicts, either between the parties or when your own values are involved in some way.
I think this is always a weird one when you're in a space where you call yourself neutral, whether that's a mediator, investigator, whatever it is. I have been in situations where, in a mediation, for instance, I might fundamentally disagree with what people are saying. I've encountered a lot of things that I'm like, oof, if we knew each other socially, I would be calling you out right now. I mean, I have also had a client where I learned after appointment that they believed in some things. In fact, not just believed in, but advocated for some things that were quite abhorrent to me. And when I'm in those positions, obviously I don't want to do further work with the parties or the clients. But in the moment when I'm doing the investigation or the mediation or whatever it is, I just don't care, because I am so focused on listening and on process that it's almost like a meditative state. I'm there to listen, to reflect things out, to think a little bit about what a gender order is going to help out here. But I am not really thinking about my relation to their values. I'm set aside. But then afterwards, after it's concluded, I might be like, all right, time to process and time to hit the tango dance floor to get that all out of my system, because that was wild.
I think that's great if you can stay in that space. I think that's not always easy, is it? Because we do react sometimes to what parties say. How do you manage that in the moment? Because if you start getting drawn in or start getting frustrated or find one of the parties really difficult, how do you manage that so that you don't get too drawn into that, and then that obviously is going to impact your impartiality or perceived fairness in the facilitation too?
I think I've felt in situations where someone's telling me something within a mediation process or a coaching process, and it
Mm.
triggers something that's really against my values. I find it really hard not to start questioning them to try and show them that they're wrong or that this is not good. And yet it's a really fine line, isn't it, to
Yeah,
maintain that
yeah.
impartiality and unconditionally supporting the person in front of you when you're values are screaming, this is wrong, this is evil, this is dangerous. And I think, like you said, it's a sign that maybe you're not the right practitioner to work with them, but you have to get through whatever you're in the middle of.
Yeah. Let me go to the balcony and figure this out for myself. Yeah. Obviously, everyone has different styles, right? I think that's part of it. I was put forward with another mediator recently, and the client could choose, okay, which one of these is going to be the mediator. And I'm very kind of like corporate and energizing, right? And the other mediator was more of that, like, man, you're wafting out peace. This is amazing what you're doing. But it's just very different styles. And I bring this up to just mention that part of it is, I guess, also personality. I don't describe myself as impartial to parties. I describe myself as omnipartial. Like, I'm on everybody's side and against the conflict. It's us against the problem. I'm friendly, I'm supportive, I'm there to help them get through this process. And I just don't really matter that much in those moments. I'll often describe myself as, like, in this moment, I'm like a pool of water. Like, things come in, they're cleaned in some way because I might be reframing, helping, whatever it might be, and they come out again. I'm in a different mode, I would say.
I'm interested in that because I think intuition and tapping into your own wisdom when facilitating, I feel is important as well. When I run training, I feel like sometimes I can get into that space where I'm just know what to do because I've done it so much. And I think we can tap into that as mediators. You sort of get into a space and just be in that space that's almost allows you to know what to ask next, without overthinking, without getting too caught up in the thoughts. It's like an intuitive part. So for me, that's really important. And it usually flows better when you're in that space rather than getting too caught up in what should I say. So how do you tap into that while also not focusing on yourself, I guess, in a way?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it's not about me. Like, I'm there to facilitate or do whatever it is. It's not about me ultimately.
Mm.
And when I talk about this sort of mediation mode or this pool of water, it's really that. But I am also, of course, observing my thoughts. And that's what I process after the fact. For example, if somebody says something which is related to actually quite a lot of violence, and so I have this moment where it's like, okay, if, I was in the outside world, I might have a reaction to this, but it's not about me or what I feel. So what do they need from me in this moment? And so I'm thinking as well about what kind of empathy am I showing on my face? What degree is this? What is the right amount for them so they can feel safe and supported and heard without making them have to react to my emotions.
So you've got to be empathetic without showing that you're on their side, particularly if they've said something challenging. So you've got to be there and be non-judgmental, but also not cause a reaction that makes you part of it, I suppose.
Yeah. And I mean, people will look at your face for those little traces of judgment or reaction or whatever it might be. There is a carefulness. And so that's why I go into this mode. I'm like, it's not about me. And so I just won't be as affected.
The question I have when we talk about this is how do we balance that with not colluding with behavior that's really inappropriate or saying things that are violent, abusive, threatening? Because if we stay neutral during that, to me, then we're colluding with that behavior. So how do you get that balance? Because that's really tricky. Yeah.
Straight up, Scott, you are a more experienced media than me. So I would also love to hear your answer to this, but I will give it a go. And it's exactly the same thing that I would do when working with like summer school students who would be rowdy because they're away from their parents or whatever. And it would be get them to set their own rules at the start of the process, right? So, I mean, for that reason, I try not to give too many rules, right? I really want them to come up with it. And if they don't meet the rules that they have agreed to, I call them out on it. If they start interrupting, I'm like, okay, I've noticed that you've interrupted whoever is speaking. Shall we revisit the norms and just see, are they still the right fit for us? And they're like, oh, I'm in trouble, right? So I think that buy-in to rules at the outset of a process is really important for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. That comes back to boundaries, I think, that you said as well. And I think observing what's happening and what's being said, being careful about how the other person in the room, if you're doing a mediation, is reacting. If they're concerned about it, you can observe that and then let them decide. Like you said, we have a responsibility to ensure that no one's in danger, but there's a limit to what we can practically do. We can't stop people saying something. We can observe it and, respond after the event. So again, it's one of those things we have to be careful about what we can promise in terms of safety, confidentiality, impartiality, because at certain times we're going to have to come outside of those boxes. I guess I'd say I'd reflect back what I'd heard, and I said, I noticed when you said that the other person had a strong reaction. Would you like to talk about how you felt about that? I guess the danger is if they feel unsafe in speaking up, in which case maybe it's not an appropriate situation for a mediation. It's the time to call it, I suppose, and say maybe we should stop. Yeah, it's fraud, isn't it?
It is, because as the media, I feel we have to try to create that psychologically safe space. So that means we do have to pull people up if they're saying things that are going to create unsafety for the other person. For you, Sam, when you're doing your coaching, when someone says something that is inappropriate, how much do you challenge them? Because I raise this because violence comes up, obviously, sometimes in the perinadolescent stuff that I used to do, but also I worked with men's behaviour change programs. There's a great book by Alan Jenkins called Invitations to Responsibility, and it's about inviting men to own their behaviour rather than forcing them, but also not colluding with comments, minimizing, denying, blaming the partner often. So it's just a really tricky one, I think, to get that nice balance between being non-judgmental and then putting in appropriate boundaries where it's, I would say, not acceptable behavior or words.
I love that phrase, invitation to responsibility. That's a really nice way to put it.
I'm going to look this up. I've been doing quite a few workplace mediations recently, and just the word accountability comes up really a lot. People just want others to take accountability. Now, whether that means for an event or whatever, or in a workplace dynamic. And I'm always asking, like, what does accountability mean to you? And of course, I have ideas about accountability. My thesis is literally on blame. I spent so much time with what is blame? What is accountability? What's responsibility? What's causation? There's a whole thing to unpack there. But it's something that people really struggle with. We use these big words, and including within a mediation, obviously, like we've used the word fairness, we've used ideas of neutrality. I've just mentioned accountability or responsibility, as you put, Scott. And there's so much room for interpretation and disagreement and conflict over these words. Of course, people have different ideas of what being accountable means or what that looks like. And yes, you could put it all under the broad banner of communication, because yes, if we communicated these concepts clear to one another, we'd be more aligned. But there's just so much space to explore when we start talking about these words.
I'm interested in your blame, because I think parties are so quick to blame others and stay stuck in that blame, and many don't reflect on their contribution to the conflict. So if you've done a lot of study on that, Laura, I would like to understand why people blame each other so readily.
It's a funny one, right? And immediately when you started talking, Scott, I thought of Sam's book and these ideas of heroes and victims and villains. We love these ideas or these overarching structures where we can fit people in really, really cleanly. We love systems that help us understand the world, whether that is religion, whether it is politics, whether it is a sports team, right? Whether it's organizational rules. And so there's that attraction to that. It's a way to understand the world around us. We love for things to go in boxes so we can understand the world. We use things such as blame to make us one thing and the other person another thing. That is why we do it. It simplifies the story for us. And of course, it makes it harder to interrogate. And again, read Sam's book about this, right? About complex stories and getting people out of those character roles. I researched specifically the ways in which blame makes villains in politics. So I used Brexit as a case study, politicians blaming usually migrants, and how that also played out in other fora. And the consistent thing is, though, beyond this, yes, success in making villains of people, attaching these negative emotions and ideas and whatever to them. Beyond that is that blame doesn't make anybody feel good. Whether you are doing the blaming, whether you are being blamed, whether you're observing other people blaming one another, we don't feel good about it. Like, we might feel angry or annoyed or judgmental or whatever it is, right? But there's not a positive thing. So it's like a temporary fix that doesn't actually help us solve our problem or that underlying thing, whatever it is we have with the person when we blame them. Justice systems are also institutionalization of blame, right? It's finding you are right, you are wrong, therefore you'll be punished. So this is a societally useful thing. It's not exclusively evil. I'm not just saying take down the justice system here, but certainly on that interpersonal level, it does not help us, even if it simplifies things for us.
Even if we go more big picture, simplicity is a real problem in managing conflict, because conflict is complex. People are complicated. It's never as simple as the good guy and the bad guy. And that's one of the things that we do, which makes people uncomfortable but is necessary, is to complicate things, is to get into the detail and to go beneath and around the boundaries and the boxes, so that we have more to work with and people can relate a bit better to each other. And blame is a really great example of that, isn't it? A simplification, opposition, I'm good, you're bad. But it limits the responses, because a good person doesn't talk to bad people. You've got a good reason to not talk to them if they're bad and you're good, which means that there's no communication. You've got nowhere to go.
Which is interesting too, isn't it? Because it's, again, that balance between being impartial and challenging people and their views, and particularly things like blame, where they're just focused on what the other person's doing and often have that reluctance to explore, maybe I've contributed to this in some way. So that's another tricky balance, isn't it? As a mediator or a conflict coach, how do you get that nice balance?
Yeah, there's a great book. I can't remember the name of the authors, but it's a book about challenging people in conflict. And they use the phrase, the loving boot. So you give someone a bit of a kick in the pants, but you do it very lovingly. And it's about, if you're too nice, you are colluding and you're not challenging them to think differently, but you don't want to do it in a way that blames them or judges them. So you've got to gently challenge firmly but gently. And I've found going in indirectly is useful, just asking for more detail and being curious and asking all sorts of questions around the blame can often help people move beyond it without directly saying, are you sure there's not more going on? What might have you done to contribute to it? If you ask it very directly, people will shut down and put their defenses up. But if you just talk all around it and get all the context and a bit more detail and history, often people will start to see it themselves without you having to sort of hold it up and shine the light on it directly for them. And I find people can accept that a bit more without losing face or losing their dignity.
Yeah. Identity. And how do you do that in a mediation? Because both parties are there, they're both blaming one another, pointing the finger. How do you challenge that as a mediator? Because we know it's not helpful.
It is a bunch of things. Firstly, in norms, if they happened to establish a norm at the start of the mediation about not apportioning blame, right, or being future focused, these can be really helpful. But I honestly wish we had a more expansive approach to mediation, right? I think there's a lot of pressure to be like, okay, do it in a certain structure, do it in this amount of time, and it'll be solved. Whereas in reality, we need flexibility, right? In some circumstances, maybe there is that conflict coaching that happens beforehand, right? So they've got the support, they've interrogated their blame or like why they're doing this, or they're unpacking some of the concepts already. So they're doing the pre work for themselves so that they are better prepared to have that conversation with the other person. And I'm not saying that purely in service of the mediation, because I think I would feel ethically squeaky about that, but also in service of the person. Because if you're equipping them with the tools to know themselves better, but also with tools like nonviolent communication, whatever it is, you're helping them get to their own ends as well. I think that is ultimately incredibly useful to not just the resolution process, but also their lives more broadly. So I think, yeah, for me, it's also about being in service of the person, I would say.
So, would you do that pre-work, that sort of pre-coaching yourself, and then go on to the mediation? And then, how do you stay impartial in that if you're doing that sort of pre-work?
This is a really funny one because I've actually got this right now with one project I'm working on. And again, I mean, for me, I find the use of the word omnipartial so much more empowering in my role because I'm helping them, I'm supporting them, I want them to get to where they want to go. And so it's not so much about like, okay, I'm going to be completely neutral because I think neutrality is a myth, right? They know that I am there to support them against the conflict, not against the other person, against the conflict. I'm there to support them in moving forward. Now, maybe that's in the joint sessions. Maybe it's in one-to-ones. Maybe it's in one-to-ones that suddenly become conflict coaching. And I think there's so much need for, again, flexibility in the process. Now, does that mean I'm always going to be the same person? I'm always going to be like the one I mentioned just now. I was doing conflict coaching, then mediation, and then I'll be going probably to normal coaching. In this particular case, it seems to work. In other cases, I have heard of it occasionally going wrong. For instance, I heard about one situation where the conflict coach coming in perhaps hadn't done Sam's conflict coaching course. And so they were really not so much focused on empowering the person with tools and the self-knowledge, but empowering them to get their own ends within the mediation, which is a very, very different thing. Because you're in essence kind of supporting the more toxic behavior. And yes, the mediation blew up. The mediation in that case was with a different person. And I have seen it go wrong. I did one mediation a couple of years ago now where I had initial one-to-ones, and it was a multi-party one. I had initial one-to-ones with the parties just to get a bit of a scoop what's going on. And I realized, they might not be ready to go into joint session and they might not feel safe enough to go into joint session yet either, which comes back to what you were saying earlier, Scott. And so I was like, okay, what can I do to be a little bit tricky, right? What can I do to help engender ripeness to get them there? And I decided to do some training on nonviolent communication, not just with them, but also with other people. So they weren't being set up to have a faux mediation session. They were being set up to learn tools, also to witness the others learning tools and dedicating themselves to learning these tools as well. Once they'd done that, we had more one-to-ones, we went to joint session, they felt empowered to put as a norm in the mediation process itself. We're going to use nonviolent communication here. And they practiced it. And so again, I'm just big on flexibility. Like it's really hard to put mediation into a box and sell it. Okay, it's a 2-day mediation. This is our package for this. We'll solve all your problems. No, flexibility with process is going to get better ends.
Great. Laura, I want to go a little bit left field here. And I've done some interviews with people asking them about how things like creativity and martial arts, what you can learn from those that help us approach conflict better. And I'm pretty sure you can give us some advice from tango. What can tango teach us about conflict and how we can manage it effectively?
Okay, firstly, don't learn from me because I accidentally kick people still regularly, okay? Not on purpose, because the kicking is always behind me and I can't see behind me. But I will say that the thing that tango has certainly helped me with a lot is boundaries. Because you change partners every couple of dances, right? So you normally dance like 3 songs and the music changes and you dance with a different partner. And of course, everyone wants to dance differently or hold you differently or whatever it might be. And so just learning to be like, okay, no, bro, I've just met you. Don't smush yourself against me. Being able to actually have these boundary discussions and learn that you'll have them respected and it's not scary, actually, like you can practice this. And so I would encourage, I guess, all the people pleasers out there to get into tango, all right? Especially men. There's always too many women at tango. So please, male people pleasers, come and dance tango and see what it'll do for your boundaries. And getting back to what I said earlier, of course, boundaries are one of the things that can be very helpful in conflict itself, right? Because we're knowing ourselves better, we're knowing what's acceptable to us, we're less likely to allow ourselves to be trampled, we're more able to get into that collaborative space because we know not just our boundaries, but also our partner, which is related, right? So it can be a very powerful tool.
Imagine also you've got to be really sensitive to the other person's movements. So there's a combination of following and leading, but you can't tango on your own, right?
Infamously, it takes 2 to tango. That's the whole saying. Yeah. You're right. It's an interesting one. I do the follower role. It's actually part of the reason I started tango. I was like, I need to learn to accept somebody else's direction. Obviously, you have to be in tune and you get better and better at tuning to different types of movements and bodies. It's a weird one for tango. And I guess it gets back to the boundary stuff. I remember early on, one of the guys I was dancing with said that they felt like they were dancing with my brain and not my body. And others have commented on my emotional unavailability during tango. And I'm like, girl, you should see me in my real life. Because you're conscious of like where your emotions are and where your boundaries are.
I guess the other part of that is just being in the moment, isn't it? Like you said, not getting too caught up in your head. Just like we've got to, as a mediator, try to be in the moment and respond as it's happening.
It is super mindful, actually.
We always ask people for their pearl of wisdom. If you had one piece of advice for all the listeners about what's useful in managing conflict effectively, what would you say?
$1 million question. Yeah.
Just make sure you get it right, Laura. That's all.
No pressure.
She didn't want the questions in advance, so she didn't overthink them, and now she's wishing, oh, I wish I'd prepared this
Well,
one.
it's true. I guess from the practitioner or the people who are learning about mediation perspective, one concept, and I mentioned a couple of times without really explaining what it was, but the idea of ripeness. Ripeness is about, is this conflict ready for resolution? And there's 4 different main models that we hear about. There's the mutually hurting stalemate. So it's like, we're stuck in this. It sucks for both of us, but we're locked in. All right, sounds like a great time for a mediation. Let's resolve this. There's the entrapment model, throwing good money after bad, like I've committed myself, I've built these alliances, my 30 colleagues all know I'm against this person. If I suddenly become buddy-buddy, then what are they going to think about me? Again, doesn't feel great because you're stuck, you're trapped, you lost autonomy. There's the impending mutual catastrophe and then the enticing opportunity in the future, which are just the opposites, right? So either something as horrible is going to happen if you can't figure this out, maybe you lose a project, or something's going to be a disaster if you can't figure it out. Or then the opposite, like if you can figure it out together, you've got something great in your future that you can go for. And so all of these are different ideas of ripeness and different signals that, okay, maybe this is a good moment to actually have this conversation because we both have, or we all have potentially, buy-in to the process. And that's the practitioner perspective. And from the individual perspective, next time you're in a conflict, maybe consider, okay, I'm in this and I'm choosing not to leave it. Firstly, why? What is this doing for me? Like, why do I want to stay in this conflict? And then also, what am I potentially going to suffer, the impending disaster, or what can I potentially gain from resolving it as well? So it's like, think about even for yourself, actually, is this right for me? So yeah, I want to spread the word about ripeness today, apparently. That's where we're at today.
It's a great concept. What happens if one person's ripe and the other person isn't? Is there anything we can do to, like put them in with the bananas in a paper bag or something?
I always get confused about which fruit or vegetable it is that you're supposed to do that with. I always really think it was avocados, but it could be bananas. I think it's not tomatoes or apples. I don't know.
Well, let's imagine it's people in conflict. How do we get people in conflict to be ripe for a conversation?
Yeah. Normally when we talk about ripeness, we're talking about the conflict itself being ripe, as opposed to individuals. Now, of course, individuals can do work. Probably people strengthen their batteners all the time. They strengthen their backup plans. Thinking about a workplace, when people are in conflict, they're like, I'll look for another job. And once they have that security, it's actually, I've got nothing to lose now. Maybe I'm now ready to jump on in. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that people can do for themselves. You can also enhance ripeness with confidence building measures. And actually what I described earlier is as far as getting them on the course together so they could actually build confidence in one another and their own and the other people's skills could also be a confidence building measure that would help the ripeness there as well, or at least make the resolution of conflict seem more plausible or possible.
And that's where Scott's training comes in handy, because that's what you do a lot, isn't it, Scott, going into organisations and building people's confidence and capacity to be able to have those difficult conversations.
Yes, I do. And do stuff on team culture too, where they do get all the issues out on the table as well and work through them as a bigger group, which is quite an interesting process.
Laura, I know it's really late for you and you probably need to go get some sleep or rush off to another late night tango session.
Don't tempt me. There is literally a tango right now. It's only 11 p.m. on a Wednesday as we record. There's 100% a tango happening.
You are in the tango capital of the world, aren't you?
You don't want any Argentinians listening to this podcast if you're going to make big claims like that. Like, you're here to cause conflict, Sam? Is that what I'm hearing here?
I don't want to even buy into the debate about Spanish or Argentinian tango. No, they're both equally awesome.
Well, I mean, that was true neutrality.
Laura, thank you so much for joining us, sharing all your wisdom and for staying up late and missing out on some tango this evening to be with us. We always like to end our podcast by saying to you and everybody listening, keep on working towards a more peaceful future.
And enjoy your conflict.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. That was fun. Good on you.